Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Data Infrastructure and Security track, and soon we'll be listening to the Data Governance Effect and Exploration into the Foundations and Futures of Enterprise Data Collaboration session with Spencer Ward. I'm Annie Flippo, your host, and our co-host today is Sachin Nahar, and we will be moderating the chat and Q&A for the duration of the session. Spencer is a customer experience leader at Data Republic, a Sydney, Australia-based company known for its Senate platform technology for securing data sharing. With previous leadership at some Silicon Beach most promising startups, Spencer understands intimately the startup and the enterprise experience of data sharing, data partnerships, and taking on digital initiatives, and capable of transforming entire industries and ecosystems. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the speaker. Thanks for being here, Spencer.
Very much appreciate the intro. Thank you all very much for joining today. Very excited about DataCon LA. There's been so many great talks, and I'm looking forward to presenting to you. So during this talk, we'll dive into what makes data collaboratives work and importantly not work. And peer into the future, sharing how organizations are thinking about digital transformation and data strategy, particularly in the frame of a post-pandemic world. I think that's important, and why it all goes back to an underpinning of good data governance. As was mentioned, my name is Spencer Ward, and my company is Data Republic, and I'm intimately familiar with the data sharing space and data innovation, data collaboration. Feel free to scan the QR codes on any of the slides you're going to see with your smartphone's camera app. If you'd like to download a slide that you see today, feel free to do that. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been a catalyst for adoption of digital technologies and really a reckoning for enacting data privacy, security, and data handling regulation, as you might know. Personally, I've had many conversations over the last 5 months with organizations, data sophisticates, and otherwise that have either experienced productivity booms or busts, depending upon the systems they actually had in place pre-pandemic. According to McKinsey, there's been an accelerated adoption of digital technologies in the consumer and business domains in a matter of approximately 8 weeks to what was forecasted to take place 5 years from now. So rapid acceleration. And that ability to seamlessly connect people to data in a safe, secure, and scalable way across disparate organizations and data silos has now become a quick business imperative. So now with this audience here at DataCon LA, I probably don't have to coax you into any alternative reality that data is useful. We get that. And we've all heard the adage, garbage in, garbage out, and that the data is really only as useful as the insights gleaned from it, that in and of itself, depending upon the data type, the quality, the context, it doesn't necessarily represent a particular value you can really put a figure to. For someone with an overarching imperative of monetizing their data, that might be a hard pill to swallow. But either way, we do understand the data initiatives and getting the right data to the right people with the right controls and the right tools at the right time can help drive productivity, better decisions, and in turn, better outcomes. Now, with the advent of cheaper infrastructure, including cloud-based storage systems, organizations have acquired oftentimes more data than they know what to do with. Several organizations that I've worked with that capture IoT sensor information from their manufacturing facilities or heavy machinery have taken to purging much of those data streams into their data lakes or warehouses, due in part to its rapid accumulation, and they're simply not knowing what to do with it. Now, there are a couple of key takeaways here. The first being that more data does not immediately equate to better data. Data minimization requirements enacted by international regulation may be a blessing in disguise in this case. Beyond this intent of individual protection, eliminating the collection of data that's either extraneous or frivolous to a purpose can help an organization be more intentional in downstream phases of consumption. If data fields that are collected are accurate, they're complete, if required, the data has been cleansed, deduped, matched, and transformed, then serving that data expediently allows the organization to execute timely on a relevant use case and reduce their overall time to value. I like to say time to data, time to value. They're very much intertwined. So as not to understate or downplay the complexity of standing up a data project successfully, I will caveat all that to say that the data lifecycle is not a single point of failure. We'll need to account for interoperability, legal agreements, and so much more. Which really brings me to this second idea, that data liquidity is often stifled by trying to strike this balance between risk and reward, particularly for the enterprise. That pertains to both the data ingest and serving mechanisms and politicking that requires a project sponsor to continually seek internal approval or justification for their work. I've personally seen Fortune 100 organizations working over the course of 18 months or more, architecting and developing data innovation programs, only to become, paralyzed and stopped up by some new data regulation, a legal concern, or a technical decision like vacillating between building for AWS or cloud or Azure. There must be some degree of foresight and kind of future proofing in a way, at least as best as possible when standing up these types of initiatives. The third point, which is relevant to this data risk versus reward idea and data use, is the inherent sensitivity of the data itself. Many organizations have begun to host open data libraries or publish open data sets to public catalogs, much like city and federal governments. Examples include the Google Cloud public data sets, AWS Open Data Registry, and Microsoft's Open Data Initiative, obviously the big ones there. These libraries and the motivations behind them are typically for social good. It's an effort for large organizations that have been revered as walled gardens to show a bit of transparency. And importantly, the data within those libraries, accessible by download or API, typically have no or low commercial value. That by making it available for public consumption, there's minimal risk insofar as brand damage or legal ramification, and less loss in potential commercial value realization that the data owner would wish to capture themselves. That brings me to the bread and butter of the topic today, this idea of enterprise data collaboration, this collision of more sensitive data and potentially lower trust relationships that will require more verification. So we find that data that's proven most valuable, that which has an opportunity for producing a return on investment for the organization that captures or collects it, is most frequently the data which is more sensitive in nature. Geolocational data like lat long, patient records, or healthcare encounters and financial transactions, for example. Where internal applications or data use has been exhausted or unexplored, this presents an opportunity for data to be mined from the outside. In the past, companies could do well following the closed innovation approach, following the old adage of if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself, really harboring data, its access, and responsibility for resultant builds. But increasingly, and we all know this, information flows cheaply and instantly over the internet. The best and brightest, unfortunately, may not exist within your colloquial four walls, particularly during and ultimately post-COVID in this age of remote work. We're much more widely dispersed and ideas are just bubbling up everywhere. So being inward looking, being a harborist has become a quick disadvantage. It may be counterintuitive, but the mere proposition of having a network or community of developers or talent to tap outside of a typical consultancy or advisory firm really allows organizations to be more resilient, more predictive, and better diversified against industrial risk. Digital transformation programs, they usually start with governed data access for internal consumption, meaning access for internal data by an organization's own employees or contractors. Limits are reached relatively quickly in that arrangement. More data or more data talent is really needed to increase model accuracy or optimize its performance, enable a new product build, support corporate partnering agendas, and so on. This is a particular problem for organizations with a narrow slice view of the customer, like insurers or those in logistics. It's also a problem for organizations that don't have an extensive R&D budget or don't have any bench strength in-house relative to advanced analytics or data science. The new complicating factor, I'll say, is that higher societal expectations following the Cambridge Analytica scandal And regulations like GDPR, CCPA, PDPA, and the consumer data right point to this notion that was once quasi-acceptable really no longer is. So my company, Data Republic, is grounded in the belief that access to data or enabling external data talent to innovate on your data isn't solved necessarily by standing up a dedicated API for each engagement, or even adding pseudo or full anonymization techniques over the top of it. Doing the analytics or development is actually usually the more straightforward part. What burns energy, time, and budget is the lead up. It's a complex web of legal, IT, data prep, and consent, ultimately of confidence and trust barriers kind of coming to fruition here. What's required really is a repeatable, scalable process and adjustable controls that instill confidence and create an efficiency framework or way of working. Because trust, at the end of the day, is really the result of transparency in how consistent decisions are being made. So if we've acknowledged the ability for enterprises to collaborate with data, that's critical, both between enterprises and between enterprises and startups or those in academia, then we must understand how to go about doing it successfully. So simply put, brakes allow us to go faster. I chose a Porsche because I'm a Porsche guy, but out of the rise of the chief data office is the data governance program, right? Standing up a committee and system that manages many catch-all parameters for data and its use: data quality, audit, security, lineage, architecture, and so much more. So though it's an initial investment to stand up and initiate this sort of committee or program, it can be seen as a factor kind of slowing progress or potentially introducing new hurdles. But data governance leaders become really a centerpiece in enabling data initiatives more rapidly. So with lesser risk and with better internal optics and understanding. So really, once implemented, the system pays dividends in the ability to do more and go faster. Now, there exists a dichotomy between the internal and external data projects. And again, the execution approach is supremely dependent upon the work being done, who is doing it, and the data involved. As with external auditors holed up in a clean room, expecting outside machine learning developers to do the same is I think, simply nonsensical. This emerging world of B2B data sharing and database collaboration initiatives between enterprises and startups, for example, are enabled by internal data governance programs, but there's new challenges that emerge as soon as data moves or is accessed by a user outside of the organization's traditional access systems or firewall. The most considerable complexities tend to be in the legal or technical realms, including retention or ownership of IP, data proliferation or replication, privacy preservation or re-identification risk, and interoperability. Now, Felix Ritchie's 5 Safes framework, developed out of the UK Office for National Statistics, is what my company, Data Republic, has taken as foundational to designing systems of oversight and governance for safe data access. If you're not familiar with the concept, by the way, I highly encourage you to take a look at it. The 5 Safes proposes the data management decisions be considered as solving problems in 5 dimensions: people, use, security, data, and output, as you see on your screen. However, at Data Republic, we found that we need to fine tune this framework and add 2 more dimensions to form the 7 controls, adding legal and audit. The original 5 Safes framework was focused on internal data access. When external parties are involved, as I mentioned before, there's these new challenges that are introduced. And that's what these additional controls really answer to. The combination of these controls leads to what we call safe use or permitted use, and are most commonly expressed as questions. So is the use of the data permissible? Can those consuming the data be trusted to use it appropriately? These dimensions are all interconnected and like modifying audio settings, right? So imagine adjusting treble and bass to produce a richer sound. Each dimension can be dialed up or dialed down depending upon the input of another element. So for example, if you can't control re-identification risk of data technically, you may wish to dial up the legal controls that obligate the user or the data consumer to not attempt re-identification at all. Now, switching gears a little bit, insofar as organizations that are able to engage in meaningful data collaboration or innovation initiatives, it very much runs the gamut. I've kind of seen it all. It should be no surprise that industry experts like Gartner, Cisco, and Deloitte have all collectively pegged failure rates for analytics, AI, and big data projects at a figure north of 75%. Pretty staggering. I was at a conference last year in Boston, actually, the Boston FinTech Festival with FinTech Sandbox. And when the audience of it was like 250 data professionals, many of them from tier 1 and 2 banks, they were asked by the moderator who had AI as a top initiative, top business imperative. Without hesitation, every hand shot up. They were asked to keep their hands raised if they were able to successfully recognize an ROI or even operationalize that AI successfully, and all but 3 hands stayed raised. So though the issues are surely multifaceted in creating success for these programs, the organizations that have better synergy, controls, and processes for their data management internally are best poised for success when turning externally. Many organizations have this overarching, what I call like a pie in the sky wish of data monetization or commercialization, making data work while they sleep, and in more brazen terms, just to make them money. You know that phrase, in order to love someone else, you got to love yourself first. More organizations need to address that self-love, to take stock of internal policies, process, and procedures, identify the gaps, and implement solutions or fixes that get a good workflow working within the organization. Importantly, too, once an organization has checked the boxes on internal optimization through data sharing, data governance, and collaboration, this is not necessarily a linear maturity curve, right? We've seen organizations recognize greater value out of innovation programs than through outright commercialization, where they initially began with their initiative. And then they jump to developing an ecosystem or a network of data or capability partners. It becomes much more meaningful than what they ever initially even envisioned. So as I mentioned, there's a lot that goes into making good data collaboration work. And we've identified a couple of key pillars that are closely aligned to when things go well. The first being internal housekeeping or readiness. So establishing a dependable data pipeline, including repeatable, scalable data prep steps, and determining who owns that, and really a cadence for data delivery if it's not in real time. Whether building or buying, right? So adopting digital technology that's fit for purpose. So if it's not agnostic to a use case or system, really ensure that it's readily adoptable, and it can be adoptable by different departments if needed, if the initiative expands. Within that internal bucket is also this legal piece. So we always recommend having templatized frameworks or documents that can be recycled for each external engagement, all of which have been blessed by your counsel. That'll really expedite that often lengthy phase of agreeing to terms and conditions. Next is determining resourcing, and in the very least, drafting a RACI or some hierarchy that determines who does what. And the last piece of that internal housekeeping bucket is arguably the most important and the hardest to assemble, is driving and supporting a culture that encourages experimentation and innovation. That's probably one of the biggest points of contention here, is how do you solve this technically, but also from the people side. That's where a lot of this gets stunted. The next piece pertains to the data in play. I stated earlier that the more data is not necessarily better, and I'd really like to emphasize that. I've seen far too many times that organizations architecting data storage and serving systems meant for external data sharing, but struggle in the implementation and really making sense of what data should be provided for which use case, even if data is properly tagged and cataloged. Of course, there is a degree to which machine or deep learning models require heaps of data, but it goes back to provisioning the right data rather than casting such a wide net. The next pillar is about technical table stakes. So what needs to happen on the contributor and consumer sides to reduce risk? And that's what we think about when we think about external engagements, data contributor and data consumer. So how do we reduce risk, increase trust, and ensure that all parties are in a position to do their best work and recognize the most value? That may be working in a particular environment, having certain software or hardware requests like GPUs or cluster computing. when the party doing the work is really hamstrung by, but not for any particular purpose, which might be, either controlling cost or risk, it can ultimately impact the desired outcomes as we might expect. The last bucket is in project orchestration and really defining the use case, desired outcomes, and any sort of deliverables that are needed. If the project is meant to deliver a model output with an area under the curve greater than zero 0.8, that should be explicitly stated. This is really just about motivating the right activity and working relationship among the organizations. Now, of course, the opposite can be true. In reality is more often the case. So data collaboration or data projects not bearing fruit, not being successful. When this occurs, it could very well be a flurry of reasons and a combination of many instead of just one. But some examples that we've seen stunt data collaboration projects include uninformed stakeholders on either side of the engagement, so just not knowing who owns what, having a poorly defined use case, so not knowing what success looks like or what quantifies or qualifies as within acceptable limits. On the contributor side, very much poor data quality. If the data is just plain inaccurate or poorly cleansed or there's missing values as null. And if those working with the data are hamstrung, as I mentioned, there's a lack of project or time management, so there's no forecasting or accounting for resourcing or budget, there's no drop dead dates, that sort of thing. And then the inability to answer to any sort of legal or governance oversight. This is a massive issue where projects are stopped in their tracks. And then actually the last one is incompatibility in environments or infrastructure. So going back to those doing the work, the tooling, has it been inadequate in any way, shape, or form? So whether it's leaders in data governance, IT, data science, digital transformation, innovation, it always comes back to the so what, right? And then you might be thinking that at the end, so what? If you can set up a foundation, establish practices, procure your software that build a function of data exchange capability, what's possible from there? And that's really where the rubber meets the road, and much of it's only limited by imagination. A few examples are shown here on your screen. The first being the piloting of external software on real data. So whether it's procurement or legal processes that just delay adoption, a data sandbox environment allows organizations to quickly engage and evaluate tech from outside vendors and be really decisive about whether to fully adopt or fold post POC. The next is innovation at scale, that work with a global pool of external experts. So providing a controlled access to your data, perhaps most often we see it for social good in a datathon or hackathon setting. So shorter time engagement, but really meaningful work and obviously at scale. The last is a rich B2B data partnership. So building out new data products or record supplementation without reliance on third-party cookies is what we're seeing as well. The typical example that we help power at Data Republic is a bank and an airline. So like Westpac and Qantas, obviously out of Australia, they help power their loyalty programs through our software as well. So as a real example, in addition, my company Data Republic worked to stand up a data sandbox for one of the major banks, for Westpac in Australia, to pilot technology from AI platform Data Robot, which some of you may be familiar with. By way of R&D, this was the bank putting on their investment portfolio hat saying, well, if I can put 20 AI products through the data sandbox and just one of them is able to be put into production to solve some fraud detection problem, for example, it'll pay for itself in the failure of the 19 others. This project allowed the bank to evaluate Data Robot on their real de-identified transaction data in a matter of hours rather than months to make a decision about deployment. And importantly, the intellectual property and software of Data Robot was also protected in this air-gapped neutral space where they could still have access to the required data in an environment that would allow the software to run and for the engineers to do their work. And thinking about this vetting at scale, this becomes a central proving ground in a way for the bank to evaluate tech of outside vendors, right? So do they license it? Do they invest in the company itself, or do they just outright acquire that company? We've seen all of those scenarios that have occurred throughout adoption of Data Republic sandbox technology. Now, the fun part, when peering into the future and thinking about what's next in this space, it's really anyone's best guess. Today, thinking about that maturity curve I showed just moments ago, there are a lot of enterprises that are well advanced, and others that these concepts are just outright obscure. Nevertheless, one thing for certain is that wherever the data collaboration goes, it faces a backdrop of global regulation, that's playing catch up in consumer data rights, consent, open data, data privacy, and security. As that advances and until we have more uniformity, even within the same industries, on the world stage, there's always going to exist this vast discrepancy in how organizations are approaching these initiatives, all depending upon what their country's regulation does or doesn't allow. So with that in mind, with that regulatory backdrop, from my experience firsthand in market, I see several major trends on the horizon. Number one is the first being cross-border and global data trades. Even with data sovereignty and particularly for federated advancements in federated analytics, where algorithms will be sourced and trained across in-country data sets, but the data itself won't move, we expect to see an increase in that. The second is the network data economy is what we call it. And this will be most telling in the nearest term in the ad industry, particularly with the eradication of third-party cookies. Many experts predict the rise of data level B2B partnerships far beyond influencer marketing. And you know, for customer 360 and greater personalization, these initiatives will not rely on traditional data aggregators or data sellers. So that's number two. Third is the collision of data collaboration with academia. The education landscape is, in general, I think, is due for an overhaul in the US. And through COVID, much of it has been forced into going virtual, as we know. But one thing's for certain, and if you follow NYU's Scott Galloway, this will sound familiar, who has predicted that post-pandemic will exist a rise in partnerships between the largest tech companies in the world and elite universities. So far beyond, you know, summer internships, this new phase of data collaboration between the MITs and Googles of the world will see strategic engagements where the university becomes an incubator for talent, sure, but also new ideas, moonshot, break the mold type initiatives will start coming out of this. Surely this is happening today. You might be sitting there and say, I know about a few partnerships already, but the scope and scale, the breadth will definitely grow. And it's going to become increasingly organized and increasingly cutthroat. Lastly is consumer consent. Individual data rights, which will be fueled by regulation, will prove a key entry point for consumers into the governed data economy. And it's going to be central to really enabling infrastructure and facilitation of enterprise data movement. So really accounting for that consumer throughout this entire data lifecycle and supply chain. That's what we're building here at Data Republic, equipping organizations to ethically claim their stake in the data economy, enable ecosystems to collide, and really connect people to data, including sensitive data in a safe, secure, and scalable way. Data Republic has brought two world-first technologies to market, including the Senate platform and Senate matching. The Senate platform is an access governance and data project collaboration tool that, combined with our legal frameworks and licenses, accelerates time to data and therefore time to value by an average 93%. It answers to the 7 controls, expanding on those 5 safes dimensions that we talked about, introducing control at each touch point for data contributors and data consumers alike. Senate matching is a patent pending privacy preserving record linkage technology that allows organizations, 2 or more, to match on sensitive, personally identifiable information without the PII fields themselves ever moving. We see adoption in the ad industry, for example, where publishers can match on unique ad IDs without the ad ID ever being exposed or moved between the matching organizations. And by design, this all gives rise to an ecosystem. So a network of organizations making their data available on one side and those mining for insights on the other. I invite you to reach out if you have any particular questions or would like more information about Data Republic or about any of the topics I discussed today. And that's all I have. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. And I want to thank DataCon LA team for putting together such a fantastic virtual event. It's been just incredible. If there's any questions, I'll go ahead and answer those now. So let me go ahead and pop over into the Hoove app, and we'll see what questions we have there. Okay, so I see a question from Navina, has asked, how is data governance related to cybersecurity? It's a really good question. So I think with cybersecurity, you typically have a practice domain within IT and some spillover into DevOps potentially, and certainly dedicated cybersecurity professionals within an organization. It's less about where cybersecurity is more about access systems and about identity providers and certainly about data access. It doesn't necessarily, it's more about the tooling and less about the actual protocols or processes that data governance would be instilling. So they're complementary. I don't think you can have one without the other, but certainly I think cybersecurity is a bit more legacy. Data governance, through the rise of the chief data officer, data governance has been much more highlighted throughout organizations, even within the enterprise standard governance or ESG movements. This has been highlighted as well. So I think they're complementary. I think cybersecurity is a bit more legacy, but again, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Spencer. I have a question. So
Please.
how does legal or other organization or HR in a company get folded into data governance? Because every department have their own, perhaps, rules and regulations. And what are your
Certainly.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm actually dealing with it right now. It's a very poignant question. So organizations that don't have a data governance committee necessarily stood up, we always recommend that there's some sort of legal counsel, some legal, representation within that data governance committee. If you're not familiar with data governance, it seems like that's definitely the topic du jour for this. But there's a lot that goes into it, right? There's this collision of what can be addressed technically, which really is that domain, even if legacy and cybersecurity. But beyond that, really this collision with culture. And I think to your point, that is where we start getting to is how do you bake in the people component? How do you bake in HR? How do you bake in legal? I think it becomes complementary in that idea of those 7 controls, right? Where that example of if you can't actually technically solve for re-identification risk, you allow legal to step in and provide additional coverage for that. So I think a data governance committee, a data governance program certainly needs legal oversight. And I know that a lot of folks that, enterprises that have robust data pipelines, they certainly have a legal component in review of any sort of data assets before they're provisioned for consumption in any sort of data pipeline or data serving system. So they're very much baked in, and I would certainly recommend that if a data governance committee doesn't have legal representation, that they certainly implement that in the near term.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to put it in the Whova Q&A or chat. And if you think of them later, feel free to put it in, and maybe Spencer will still be around the Whova app to answer. And I think that people are welcome to connect with you, right, Spencer?
Please, yeah, please. Whether it's through the Whova app or through my email, spencer@datarepublic.com, or on LinkedIn, yeah, please reach out. I'm happy to cover any sort of topics that I discussed today, or talk Data Republic or data sharing, whichever you'd like.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Spencer, for your time. It was a very interesting talk, and thank you, everyone, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your day.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Bye.
much.